Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a true story with you. Not one of my own, but that from Lucian of Samosata, one of the funniest writers I've ever encountered, the great satirist from the 2nd century of the Common Era. And Lucian cast his eye on the classical Greek sources, anything he could get his hands or eyes on, and in a 40-page novella, he roams and romps all over those sources. Homer gets made fun of. Herodotus, Plato comes in, Sophocles gets a name check, and numerous other Greek writers, many of whom we don't read, some are not even extant. The Homeric hymns come up at one point. But it's a very, very fun book, and it's all over the place. Lucian takes us to the moon. He takes us to the underworld. We go sort of ice boating, not quite ice skating. We spend a month inside the belly of a whale, and it's all fantastic. And of course, it's all very sly satire. That's not really that sly. I mean, the influences are right out there in front. He begins very early on. I came across all these writers, and I did not feel that their romancing was particularly reprehensible. Evidently, it was already traditional, even among professed philosophers. Though what did surprise me was their supposition that nobody would notice they were lying. And he goes on towards the end of that. He goes, I am much more sensible about it than others are, after saying I'm going to turn my hand to romancing. For I will say one thing that is true, and that is that I am a liar. It seems to me that to confess voluntarily to untruthfulness acquits me of the charge, should other people bring it. My subject then is things I have neither seen nor experienced nor heard tell of from anybody else. Things, what is more, that do not in fact exist and could not ever exist at all. So my readers must not believe a word I say. He's got this disclaimer, and then we're off. We go on this journey, this voyage to the moon, and we find out that there's these great wars taking place on the moon. They have horse vultures, and a single feather on the horse vulture is enormous. It's like the length of a tree. There are people riding gnats. There's people riding fleas. There's people riding 200-foot-long ants. You know, like those ants that are in Herodotus that seem very large and strange over in Asia. Well, man, on the moon and on the sun, they have ants that are 200 feet long. He goes on, well, how on earth do you fight these battles up in the sky? Well, here's how they do it, okay? On the moon, there grow enormous spiders, each one much bigger than the islands of the Cyclades. These were instructed to spin a web across the sky between the moon and the morning star. And as soon as they had constructed a plane by this means, the infantry was drawn up on it under the command of Bat, son of our weather lord, and 2 others. So they have a massive spider web in the sky between Venus and the moon that they're going to do battle on. And they do battle, and it's violent, it is wild. It's a total send-up of the Iliad. And so after that, then Lucian and his friends, they finally escape. And then in the ocean, they're swallowed by this enormous whale, and they spend a month there. They, of course, do battle there as well. They have armor, so they're at a great advantage. And there's all sorts of ridiculous. People have shields made out of mushrooms. People throw dried cuttlefish. And he notes, we had javelins, so, we defeated them, of course. They finally have to figure out a way out of the whale. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody who reads it, but they then realize at a certain point that if they're going to escape, they not only have to figure their way out of the whale, but that there's a last minute change that has to take place. And it's all utterly ridiculous and quite comical. But there's all these strange details like, well, we realized that the whale would open its surface and open its jaw about once every hour. And so we would just count that, and that became our way of time. So this incident occurred at the second opening of the whale's mouth that day. But after they escape from the belly of the whale, after about a month, they then end up on this strange island, and none other than King Rhadamanthus is ruling there, judging different people. And one of the people who gets judged is Ajax, and they're trying to figure out, should he be allowed to join the heroes here? And it turns out, Lucian never quite says it to us, but it turns out, of course, we're in the underworld. It's a little bit different from the underworlds that we see in Homer or in Virgil or other works. Lucian's very funny, so it works. And Ajax is pleading to get in, and they finally say, well, give him a dose of hellebore, send him over with Hippocrates, give him a dose of hellebore, and we're going to bring him back in a few days and see if he's, all there and if we'll allow him to join. Then Menelaus and Theseus are arguing over who Helen should be spending time with. because they both feel that they were married to her. And there's Rhadamanthus has to decide, and he finally says, well, Menelaus really worked hard to win Helen back. So I'm going to lean towards, Menelaus. But I'll add that Theseus, you have the queen of the Amazons, you have the daughters from Crete, from Minos. So you kind of have other wives too. But that's the type of spirit that occurs here in the underworld. But it continues. Lucian lists all the different people. The greatest inducement to happiness they have is the two springs near their table, that of laughter and that of pleasure. At the beginning of the banquet, they all drink from both of these, and thereafter they spend their hours laughing and enjoying themselves. And he goes on to list all the different people who are there. Socrates is one of them. I was told that Rhadamanthus was displeased with him, that is Socrates, and had often threatened to expel him from the island for his nonsense if he didn't stop his self-deprecation and enjoy himself. Plato was the only one missing, and we've been told that there are a couple of people who don't get to enjoy this pleasurable, laughing underworld, that they're being tortured. So is Plato one of these? Plato was the only one missing. They said he was living in the republic he constructed himself, under the constitution and laws of his own devising. It goes on. There were no Stoics in the company. Apparently they were still climbing the steep hill of virtue. And about Chrysippus, we heard that he was not permitted to land on the island until he had taken the hellebore treatment a fourth time. He's even worse off than Ajax. The academics, it was said, were ready to come, but were holding back in considering the matter, since they did not yet accept the possibility of there being such an island. And it just goes on and on, just making fun of everything that Lucian can possibly think of. And he makes all sorts of linguistic puns. There's all these references to cheese, and then Greek words for cheese, and Greek words about, there's one named for milk, and then that's what comes out when they squeeze. It's all sorts of nonsense. There are people who are floating on corks. There are men who sail on their backs and have a mast. And Lucian's just having a ball. He's having a lot of fun. He quotes Thucydides ironically at one point, because there is this moment where the various people who are being tortured in the underworld escape and try to fight the heroes, and Achilles and Odysseus lead them in. And then Homer wrote an account of this battle. When I left, he gave me the text to bring to men on earth, but we lost it afterward along with everything else. The poem began, "Now tell, my muse, of the fight of the dead heroes." And then, right when it seems like we've had a real ball in the underworld and they finally leave, someone falls in love with Helen, and that creates some conflict. They finally leave, and then they end up in a really strange land that absolutely feels like it was, sitting there at the table when Swift was working there on the end of Gulliver's Travels with the Houyhnhnms, because we get to the land of the ox heads and the donkey legs. Donkey legs is pretty similar to a certain book from the Odyssey that people are familiar with. It goes, "What happened on the continent I shall relate in the books to follow." Remember, he told you at the beginning he was a liar, and that last sentence is a lie. He never wrote any more of this, but it's a real joy to read, and it's very fun if you've read Herodotus or Homer or different Greek writers. But even if you haven't, there are elements of it that bring to mind later writers like Jules Verne, and many others. So I had mentioned, of course, that he's mocking Herodotus big time. We do make it to Cloud Cuckoo Land at one point from Aristophanes the Birds. And Aristophanes is the one who really seems to have been another honest inspiration for Lucian, somebody he was drawing from and laughing with, not at. Homer's Odyssey, of course, and the Iliad are parodied numerous times. There are some references. It's clear that Lucian thinks Xenophon is a bit boring, but he does quote Thucydides, specifically the end of the narrative of the Sicilian expedition. Like, he quotes the actual line in his true story. I had mentioned Gulliver's Travels, of course. The Cosmicomics of Italo Calvino came to mind. Lucian was an enormous influence on other satirists, including Erasmus, not just in the Praise of Folly, but in other works. I thought of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz in the ways that her poetry and her letters of protest took on different forms of satire in a way that was not funny because it was so urgent and real for her, but that are in that vein. And of course, I was reminded of the absolutely brilliant posthumous memoirs of Rascoe by Machado de Assis. Again, someone who's very open about his influences. It's very clear who he's playing with, and who's in his mind as he's making his jokes in his wonderful novel, and the great Tristram Shandy. There are ways in which I think Lucian overall reminds me in some ways of Voltaire. A True Story doesn't quite line up perfectly with Micromegas, but there are some similarities there. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the ways that Alan Moore likes to satirize history and have some fun in works like The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I'll close by adding that I was first exposed to Lucian when I was 18 in this book, Prometheans, Ancient and Modern by Burton Rascoe, who listed numerous other writers that I learned about for the very first time there as I was in my winter final exams. And Petronius is in this book, Lucian, Apuleius, and that was really how I got into all of those writers and getting into this side of classical works that I hadn't really heard about. So let me know if you've read Lucian. Let me know if there are other great satires that you enjoy. And again, I hope everybody enjoyed this true story. I promise there will be more videos on Lucian to come.